Mr. Torres. Secretary Panetta, you and I share belief in American leadership. We share belief that America, for all its imperfections, is on balance a force for good in the world, and that America plays an indispensable role as the leader of the free world and the enforcer of the rules-based international order, and that the alternative, a world shaped in the totalitarian image of the CCP, is too terrifying to imagine. But that basic belief in the benignity and necessity of America's global leadership, which is the raison d'etre of the China Committee, has been eroding not only abroad but here at home, where we are witnessing the rise of isolationism on both the left and the right. And so America as a democracy, constrained as it should be by the consent of the governed, is American global leadership politically sustainable in the long run if American sentiment here at home takes a decidedly isolationist turn, as it did in the aftermath of World War I?
Yeah, look, we made that mistake before. Before World War II, this country decided that somehow it could be isolationist and not have to get involved in dealing with the challenges and the threats abroad. We learned our lesson. I hope we learned our lesson, which is that you can't put your head in the sand. In a global world, it's even more so. The United States has to be out there, has to be dealing with our allies, has to be developing relationships with those that agree with the goals that we seek. We have to be engaged with the world. We cannot just simply pull back and pretend that somehow we can escape our responsibilities in the world and just somehow focus on issues here in the United States. Yes, we have to be concerned about the United States. Yes, we have to be concerned about our economy. But we also have to be concerned about our role in the world. The United States has to be a world leader. If there's any lesson we learned from World War II, is that the United States is a world leader. And let me tell you something. If the United States is not a world leader, nobody else will play that role.
In your testimony, Secretary Panetta, you said that America needs to send a message that it stands by our allies, but Congress itself has sent nothing but mixed messaging. Even though there's overwhelming bipartisan bicameral support for Israel and Taiwan, there has been an indefinite delay in delivering aid to both countries. Congress fails to act not only when Democrats and Republicans disagree, we fail to act even when we agree. And if there were standalone bills on Israel and Taiwan with no poison pills, both bills would pass overwhelmingly in both chambers of Congress. And so given the risk that negotiations around Ukraine and immigration could languish indefinitely, do you believe that it might be necessary at some point to decouple Israel and Taiwan from the larger negotiations in order to pass them immediately as standalone bills?
Well, look, as a former member of Congress, I said in my over 50 years of public life, I've seen Washington at its best, and I've seen Washington at its worst. The good news is I've seen Washington work. The reason I said I had the best job in the world as a member of Congress is because Republicans and Democrats, when I was here, worked together. We worked together and we got things done. We had good relationships. And when an issue like aid to a foreign country came around, we worked together. Look, I understand that politics is involved. I understand that there's the give and take. I mean, that's what democracy is all about. And I understand that dynamic. But in the end, it isn't about scoring political points. It's about governing. You guys aren't elected to come back here and pound your shoe on the table. You're elected to come back here and govern. That's what people elect you for. And for that reason, ultimately, people who of goodwill need to sit down, develop whatever deal they can develop, and get it passed. And if they can't get a deal, then there is no question that they have got to move Ukraine aid, Israel aid, and Taiwan aid on its own.
And I guess I have 10 seconds left. Do you feel China is emboldened by Donald Trump's America First isolationism or deterred by it?
Look, I
Was that for me?
Oh, that's for
Time has
Secretary Panetta.
expired, and we were trying to hit the 11 o'clock deadline. Mr. Banks is recognized.
Secretary Pompeo, I'm not sure the world has ever experienced.
Questions for the record will be considered.
Secretary Pompeo, I'm not sure the world has ever experienced the American foreign policy whiplash from peace through strength, the swagger of the Trump-Pompeo approach, to the weakness and appeasement that we see coming from the current administration. Why did Putin wait for you and President Trump to leave office before he invaded Ukraine?
It's good to see you again. Look, I try to take a fact-based approach to these things. I often get asked, would these things have happened if you all were still there? I avoid answering those. I can only articulate that they did not. I can only articulate that Putin decided that it was not a wise time to invade Ukraine while we were there, and then shortly thereafter began to continue his effort to take more of Ukraine. He took a fifth of Ukraine under President Obama, 0% during our time, and then went at it again. In the end, Putin didn't change. Putin's been the same guy since he was a young KGB officer. His desire for greater Russia is deep and embedded in his DNA. The only thing that stops these bad actors from roaming free around the world is an America prepared to respond in a way that puts more costs on them than the benefits of action.
So fast forward, last weekend, 3 of our American heroes were killed by a drone operated by the Houthis. What would have been the swift, appropriate reaction to hold those accountable for killing our American heroes?
It's hard to know, Congressman, exactly the response at an operational level that we would have taken. Deterrence is always temporary. It's one of the things I reminded everyone in the administration. Maybe when you have deterrence for a moment, you can squander it so quickly. And frankly, that's what has happened. We've lost that moment. By the way, we had risk too. There were rounds fired at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad when I was a Secretary of State. We armed the damn thing to the teeth to protect our young men and women who were there, military and diplomatic women that were in that facility. And then when we were beginning to have deterrence slip, we took a strike on General Soleimani that restored that very deterrence for a time, for a period. I think the Trump administration would have recognized long ago, this would have been before October 7th, that you can't negotiate with the Ayatollah. You can't release sanctions and allow them to grow their foreign exchange reserves from $4 billion to over $50 or $60 billion. That money will be used for terror, and this is now the risk that we have in the escalations taking place as a result of the United States and our allies and partners having lost that deterrent capability, and will.
Secretary Pompeo, you notably warned our nation's governors about not getting too entwined and entangled with the Chinese Communist Party, as many of them did. As Washington becomes more aware of the China threat, the CCP has targeted many of our state's governors. This morning, the Washington Post published a story about the CCP's United Front efforts amping up their engagement with our nation's mayors, including the mayor of Carmel, Indiana, in my state, the former mayor, he just left office, who went on lavish trips to China and engaged at a high level with Chinese officials in their country. Why should our nation's mayors stray away from these types of entanglements with the Sister Cities projects and other CCP United Front efforts?
You know, Congressman Banks, it's in some ways parallel to what we were talking about in Africa, right? The Chinese Communist Party will always show up at people's doors with things that feel good. The remarks I made to the National Governors Association, I had to run through a State Department roadblock to make those remarks. It was hard for even the State Department to see this threat, not just at the federal level, but this was to a series of governors. And I now remind people, the Chinese Communist Party is showing up at school board meetings. They're showing up at city council meetings and county commission meetings all across America. In your state, Chairman Gallagher, in Wisconsin, they made a hard play for your state legislative body. They are determined to propagate their efforts. They want to make friends so that when they're confronted, they can turn to their friends and say, we're not such bad guys after all. The Chinese Communist Party is truly evil. They will work at every level of government. They will work against our private sector as well. They'll show up at PTA meetings if that's what it takes. This is an effort at every level for the Chinese Communist Party to have a capacity to influence our government. Can you expand on why the
Sister Cities program is so dangerous?
When the Chinese Communist Party shows up at your school and offers a free swing set, it is not because they care about the health of your children. That's maybe the simplest way to articulate Sister Cities programs and the Confucius Institutes and all of these United Front efforts inside of our country. They may show up and give you some temporary lift, but in the end, it is about them, not about us.
Mr. Khanna.
Back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary Panetta and Secretary Pompeo, for your service to our country. As you know, we hollowed out a lot of our manufacturing in this country, and a lot of it went to China. China has a massive trade deficit. We still have a massive trade deficit with China, and China has trade surpluses with Japan, with South Korea, with India, engaged in unfair economic competition. Would you think it's reasonable for the United States to explicitly have a goal to try to reduce the trade deficit with China by 10% every year, or some metric, so that we can rebalance the relationship?
I think it is very important for the United States to be able to develop industry, manufacturing, develop those products that are important, particularly to our national security. And you're right, we've hollowed out that capability over the last few years. We need to be able to make clear that we are going to develop the kind of security that we need. And yeah, I think limits make sense as part of that package of developing our own capabilities and manufacturing and industry.
Secretary Pompeo?
Yeah, I'd add, seems largely right. I'd add only this. We should begin the focus on things that really matter as opposed to trade more generally. I'm happy to think our way through that, but the initial problem set is at the dual-use technologies, AI, all of the places where the next generation of American manufacturing will actually evolve from, right? The manufacturer, I ran a machine shop in Wichita, Kansas, probably the only Secretary of State with that in his background of even for the next 250 years. In the end, we ran machines, we were good, but in the end it was technology innovation and the intellectual property against which we were building those manufactured goods, which were most important to the workforce and my capacity to grow my business. And I think that's true today. We ought to make sure we protect those things, and we can get that right as a policy matter pretty straightforward. And I've watched as you all have tried to tackle that, and I hope you all can make even more progress there.
One of the things that I'm working on a bipartisan basis is seeing how we can have steel, and clean steel in particular, returned to the United States. I mean, hollowed out in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, Warren, Ohio, Downriver, Michigan. Keith Krach, who worked for you, Secretary Pompeo, was one of the originators of the CHIPS and Science Act. I mean, that I give him credit, even as we worked with Todd Young and Chairman Gallagher was in an earlier part on the Endless Frontiers. And we did that for CHIPS. Can we do that for steel, which is to say the next generation of steel, which is going to be direct reduction impact in Toledo or hydrogen? Why can't we lead in something like that and have the government partner with the Cleveland Cliffs on an issue like that, like we did for CHIPS? I mean, we went from the largest exporter of steel. Now 9 out of the 15 biggest steel companies are in China. So one, would you support a CHIPS-like approach to new modern steel plants in the United States? And second, if you could just add, since then I'll give you the rest of the time, I don't understand how we're even thinking of letting Nippon Steel buy U.S. steel. I mean, Japan would never let us buy one of their steel plants. I mean, why is this even a question?
I guess I'll start with the second one and then the first one. I actually encourage foreign direct investment in the United States. I think it's incredibly important. It has created thousands and thousands of jobs in my hometown of Wichita, Kansas. Foreign companies who say, Japanese, European companies who want to come invest in America and create jobs. South Koreans now investing enormous amounts of money in Texas to build semiconductor fab. I think we should be enormously supportive of foreign direct investment when it wants to come here on American terms, and these are our friends and allies. Second, I did support the CHIPS and Science Act. It was with a touch of reluctance in my heart, but it was between Secretary Ross and myself and our two teams. And by the way, Secretary Raimondo has been fantastic on this. I credit the Biden administration for this. This was a set of technologies that mattered, and we had none of it here at home. I think that's the quintessential model for when someone needs to use American taxpayer dollars as a form of industrial policy. I think we need to be very careful about how and when we do that. And I prefer competition as the model, but when the competition is unfair and capital markets won't support an important technology for our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, then I think we can do that. And if someone could make the case that steel were so, I'd support it. I wonder if those industrial metals don't end up, if you put a tariff on them or a tax on them, if it doesn't end up costing the American industry more than it gains them.
Gentlemen's time expired. We have 4 minutes to do Molinar, Whitman, and Steele. The Congresswoman, not Steele. We can do it. We're going to lead off with Molinar. And
All right, gentlemen, thank you, and I will be very quick. Appreciate your service. There is a Chinese company building an electric vehicle battery plant in my district. As part of the project, they plan to bring 20 to 50 Chinese nationals to Michigan. What do you feel are the odds of those nationals may engage in espionage for the CCP while they're in the United States? I know you've both been involved in looking at these kinds of things. Secretary Pompeo, you were issuing work visas to Chinese nationals as part of the State Department. I wondered if you'd both comment on that.
Look, I don't think there's any question that they're going to take advantage of that situation, and I think we have to be very vigilant about what the hell's going on. That's just the way they operate. They'll establish a manufacturing unit. They'll establish whatever they can, and then they will use that for their own intelligence purposes. They will use that for their own economic purposes. They'll use it to be able to gain the kind of advantages that they want that are counter, frankly, to the interests of the United States. I think it is very important in those situations to make sure that that the United States and that our intelligence capabilities are being used to make sure that we know what they are doing that could hurt the United States.
I think it is worse than the fact that they will engage in espionage. I think that's just top of the list. They will use this in ways that will leverage Chinese advantage. These plants are deeply dangerous to our national security and ought not be built.
Thank you. And then one last question. One of the concerns, you've talked about the Belt and Road initiatives, China spreading money around. One of the concerns I've had is in some of our like in the Inflation Reduction Act, we provide green energy tax credits. This company would actually likely be applying for a green energy tax credit, so we could actually be supplying American taxpayer dollars to fund this project. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I'm against it. Trying to be quick.
Thank you.
By the way, it's not just that. You cite a good example, a marquee example, one that's been very public. There are dozens of these taking place, and I promise you the Chinese Communist Party is not subsidizing American companies that are acting in America's interests inside of China that benefit the United States of America.
Thank you. Secretary Panetta?
I think we have to obviously be innovative in the way we use economic assistance, but we also have to be careful in the way we do it. And I think if we're going to provide funds, we better make damn sure they're not being used for purposes that undermine our national security.
great.
Thank you both very much. I yield back, Mr.
Mr. Whitman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Pompeo, Secretary Panetta, thanks again for your service to our nation. You both have had extensive experience as cabinet members in dealing with the CCP. So you have that direct experience, and you see where things are today. Tell us, what is the most significant change that you have seen with the CCP? And do you think today that Xi Jinping and the CCP are more likely or less likely to take decisive action to reunify Taiwan?
Briefly, please.
As I mentioned in my testimony, I've visited with Xi a number of times when I was both director as well as Secretary of Defense. And at the time, I remember one conversation where he was being critical that we were rebalancing our force to the Pacific. And I said, look, we're a Pacific power. We have every right to have a presence in the Pacific What you ought to be interested in is what you can do to work with us to deal with North Korea, to deal with the problems of trade, to deal with the problems of a free sea approach to trafficking and to our Navy. And he said something about, yeah, you know, if we could work together, we could develop peace and prosperity. That was the Xi that I saw. But he's changed. There's no question about it. And you know, we could talk about the reasons. There are a lot of reasons why it's happened. But there's no question in my mind that Xi has been cornered in a number of ways, both in the way he dealt with COVID as well as the way he's dealing with his economy. There is one fundamental focus that Xi has. It's on China. It's on China. And his problem right now is that China is eroding from under him. And I think that makes him more dangerous, not less.
I'd concur. Secretary Panetta dealt with a very different Xi Jinping than we dealt with. Over time, he changed, his objective changed. He accreted more power, I think, gave him more freedom to move, and I think it's much more likely that he will continue his, if not militarily, his political efforts to bring political control to Taiwan.
Quickly, Ms.
Thank you, Mr.
Steele.
Chairman.
We've hurt U.S. Steel here. Go ahead.
Both secretaries came from California, and especially for Secretary Pompeo, you actually came from my district, City of Fountain Valley, and thank you for coming out today. I wish I have a little time, but you know what, since I'm a junior member, and you know what, don't have time, but I just want to say thank you.
Great. We appreciate that. Thank you to both of our witnesses in what was almost a perfect hearing, but graded against the curve of Congress. We're still doing pretty well. And questions for the record are due 1 week from today. And with that, the committee is adjourned. No selfies with the witnesses. They got to go.